Hello and welcome to Start Here. So, the question for today is why focus on executive skills? So, some of us call this executive function and some of us call it executive skills. But no matter what you call it, if we're talking about the air traffic control system that's inside your brain. And so, we focus on this a lot with small children in early childhood years, and then a lot more starting in the middle grades. And then we know that executive function starts leveling out in your early 20s when you reach adulthood, which is one of the reasons why you can't rent a car until you're 25. So we focus on executive skills because this is where decisions get made. Let's take a look at the list. So, executive skills start with response inhibition. Sometimes it's just hard to give up that cookie. We know about the marshmallow test. But really, a lot of it goes back to working memory. So, working memory is what you can keep in your brain. We call it a sticky note. So, as much as you can write on a sticky note is about what I can keep in my working memory. We used to say it was about 7 things, but it's probably closer to 3 or 4. That's probably evolving over time. And 3 or 4 things to keep in your working memory at a time is not a lot in a school. So if you think about a student who might be going from class to class in 6th grade, they're walking in the front door of your classroom and they're looking around and they're realizing they have a new seat. So that's going to change their working memory cognitive load for a minute, and then you greet them at the door and you say, hey, I need you to go and get your missing work from yesterday. That's 2 things. And then they might be distracted over a argument they had with their mom that morning. That's 3 things. And then they hear their name down the hall and they think, are they talking about me? And that's 4. So at that point, you'll probably get a what did you just say? Because their working memory is already full. So we want to make sure that there's a lot of routine in students' day so that they can stay on sort of autopilot. That's the part of the air traffic control analogy here, because your working memory gets filled up pretty fast when there's a lot going on. Emotional control is one of the things that can keep our students from being successful. We know this as adults because sometimes if you're faced with something like, I need to work on my taxes today, but I'm frustrated about something that happened at work. I just don't have the bandwidth right now to deal with it. Sometimes it's hard to show up as your best self in a conversation if you're distracted by something or frustrated. And sometimes you're just stressed about things. So task initiation has a little asterisk next to it because task initiation is often it's not about having your materials ready. It's not about knowing that it's due. Sometimes I can't get started on something because of something like emotional control or stress. So a lot of task initiation is related to something completely different than what we scaffold students for. So that's something worth bringing up in the future. Sustained attention, metacognition, planning, prioritization, flexibility, organization, time management, goal-directed persistence. Those are other executive skills. We're not going to spend as much time on them right now because if you sort out working memory, emotional control, students can get a little control over their response inhibition, which you know is an issue for a handful of students in your classroom. It solves some of the task initiation things that are driving us crazy right now. Students just aren't getting started. And we're having conversations about motivation, which are probably not the conversations we want to have, but we don't have any other language for them. So this is a cartoon from 1987. If this reminds you of anything, it's because the illustrator is the same guy behind The Simpsons. So 1987. So if you do the math on this, it's actually more than 37 years now. So we take a look at this and they look familiar to what we're seeing right now. So don't see yourself as the teacher in this, but take a minute and see if anybody looks familiar. Was that you? Because when we were students, when we were children, we were the same. Students haven't changed. Children haven't changed. We are who we are. What's changed is our context and our tools. We didn't have magic glowing rectangles back in the 80s. We didn't have them in the 90s. We do have a lot with social media. We do have a lot of other things going on in students' lives. But also, we did pass notes. We did crumple paper. We did giggle and get off task. Everybody always asked to go to the bathroom. So those things haven't changed. Children are children. But these are the barriers that we've been seeing since the pandemic, and they're probably driving you a little batty. So students should be organized, but they aren't. And that's not just organized materials, that's organized in their thinking. And part of that is we've been thinking about student thought processes as a file drawer, like they take information, they put it in a file drawer. But it's actually not like that. Using the Universal Design for Learning lens, what happens is the neurons, as they continue to make connections, as students practice a thing over and over and over, those actually get reinforced. And so if they don't use something over and over, it doesn't stay in their brain's organized system. So whatever you have as a habit is the thing that you continue to do, which is why routines are such a big deal for us. Now, there's a downside to that too. If every time you come into your kitchen, you open the refrigerator, that will become the organization of your thinking. And even if you just got back from dinner and you had a lovely dinner and you're full, if you're used to opening up the refrigerator when you walk in the kitchen, you will still do it. And so will the people around you. And you've probably called somebody on that before. So students should be organized, but they aren't. And that's not so much about putting things in file drawers in their head, but actually having them make connections and add to their existing knowledge, which is why we say we build on prior knowledge. Number 2, students should actively, appropriately participate, but they don't. And we know that because we've got hood, head, desk still happening after the pandemic. And some students come in and shut down regularly. Some students don't talk in class. And if they do talk, it's not about what we want them to. And sometimes kids don't know how to appropriately participate. So that's our second barrier. The third one is students are supposed to be drawing from a strategy toolkit. Our standards are at a higher level than they've ever been before. In the 2000s, they were at a pretty low level for Bloom's or the DOK. In the 2010s, they were a little bit higher, and now they're much higher. And they're supposed to be using a set of strategies that they're drawing from a strategy toolkit, but they're not drawing from that. And so we've got to figure out, how do we help them draw from a strategy toolkit? Part of that is, what is the strategy toolkit? So for the first barrier of organization, we use scaffolds. We scaffold all kinds of things, but we definitely need to scaffold organization for students because physically they need to learn how to organize themselves in different contexts and settings. And some of us are very good at this and some of us aren't. And so we all benefit from it. And at all age levels, we benefit from it. All of us know somebody in their 30s or 40s who has a disorganized house or a disorganized car or can't find anything, never has their keys. There's a reason they sell AirTags as a let's find your keys device. So we want to think about organization physically, but also in your brain. So when we're organizing thoughts, we want to make sure that we're helping students by scaffolding them, of connecting one thought to another. So if we're starting with some surface learning and some facts or concepts, then we're moving those onto that. How will I use that? That knowing how, which is probably a learning strategy, and then moving on to the knowing with part of, when I'm faced with a new context, when I'm faced with a novel problem, what do I do with this? What am I going to choose to apply? And so if I've got to organize that in my head, it helps if the teacher, if the grade level, if the department, every English teacher, every math teacher, every science teacher, social studies teacher, if everyone's using the same toolkit, that helps organize things in your brain. So we plan the first 20 days, which we have another video on that, and I highly recommend it. We also have a book. We teach organization the same way we teach academics. And so we teach students to do some self-questioning. How does this relate to something I already know? Many, many years ago, a lot of people learned KWL as their first organizational advanced organizer method to work with students. And an advanced organizer, which in modern times we often call a learning target or a learning intention, an advanced organizer, a learning target, a learning intention is a way to organize things in your head. And so if you're using the Universal Design for Learning framework, or if you're using New Classroom Instruction That Works model for best first instruction, this is how we teach organization the same way we teach academics. We also use anchor charts as visuals so that students can set themselves up. This could be the unit organizer in the strategic instruction model. This could also just be a concept map. It could also be our step-by-step directions for how our classes run and how we make connections between things in our content area. We also give feedback on student performance. If a student is disorganized physically or disorganized in their brain on the learning target, the learning intention, or the advanced organizer, we give them feedback so that they can then identify, hey, that's a thing I want to do better later, because sometimes students just don't know. So the second area about appropriate active student participation, sometimes it's hood, head, desk, sometimes it's just off-task behavior, and sometimes it's students just not feeling part of the community. So once again, planning the first 20 days, we do teach participation the same way we teach academics, so gradual release of responsibility. And this is a heavy focus on student community. So a lot of the high quality instructional materials include a community building section in the first 20 or 30 days of the curriculum, and you do not want to skip this. This is where students are learning how to think in pair. This is where discourse is starting in math tasks. Students are becoming responsible for their own thinking. This is setting up that trusting environment. And so we have to teach that. It can relate to your positive behavior interventions and supports, but it often goes a little bit deeper into content-specific participation. So if you're in a science classroom, you might be digging into the scientific science and engineering practices in Virginia. You might be digging into the developing skilled readers standards and the math process goals. So we also use some visuals to support this. Often this is a learning strategy, which is a learner-owned strategy, which may have mnemonics or be a schema strategy. So it could be something like notice and note signposts, or the 3 big questions. It could be UPS check in math. It could be to pry in science. And then, of course, you give feedback on student performance. And this is what we call engagement. And so the appropriate active student participation could include things like Kagan strategies, but it really doesn't matter what particular things you're doing, as long as you teach them and expect them and give feedback to students on how they're using them so that they can see why they're doing it. And then the third one, and nearest and dearest to my heart, is students draw from their strategy toolkit. So these are learner-owned strategies. They are things that students are going to use in order to transfer to new contexts. And so if we've learned how to do something in math class and a student has to be able to create a chart or a table or a graph, we might use to pry in the classroom to make sure that students can set up their mathematical model so that it's useful for them to communicate with others. And so I would put that potentially in the first 20 days of my class. I would teach it through gradual release of responsibility with an I do, a we do, a y'all do partner practice, and then slowly release responsibility to the students after I've seen them do something 3 times correctly, which we know from new classroom instruction that works. So in UDL, we call this learner expertise. We're building learner expertise. Students are adding to the skills in their strategic network. So those connections in the brain are getting thicker and stronger. And so in the future, when they're faced with a novel task and they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this, I wonder if I'll use to pry, or maybe I'll use EPS check. But they also might use something else that we've done, like 3 reads. And a lot of these are living in our HQIM, or you could collect these from other sources. Like these are things that are in other content areas, but they also apply to yours. We do use anchor charts and visuals to scaffold students. If I'm distracted and my working memory is overwhelmed by maybe a stressful thing that happened in the hallway, or my tummy hurts, like could be all kinds of things. I'm just tired. I stayed up too late playing online, which pretty more common than we hope for. Then the anchor chart is just a reminder. We have visuals all over professional settings. So if you go into a hospital, if you go into a car dealership, if you go into a restaurant, you'll see that any pilot has checklists. So anchor charts and visuals are everywhere, and they are meant to be professional supports. And so we should start using those with children so they get used to the idea that I'm going to use environmental print and visuals to support my learning as I go. And then, of course, we give feedback on student performance so that they can see how well am I using my strategy? Did I remember to use strategies? Do I need some hints about those and moving forwards? And some of those things we are learning through, like the 5 practices in math, or we're using it when we're writing high quality questions in the English curriculum or science. And so all of this total is something that we've been calling motivation. So motivation isn't something that's inside of a child. It's actually a situation that occurs because students are in the right place at the right time with the right skills. So they have a strategy toolkit and they see, hey, I have an idea about this and I'm in a community where I feel comfortable and I'm thinking about stuff and making connections in my brain. So I'm just going to do it. And we call that level 2 fun. It's not as much fun as being at a birthday party, but it makes the time go by quickly. And sometimes you look up at the clock and say, oh, I didn't even realize the time had passed. And the students are still working. And that's what a motivated learner looks like. And that is where we wanted to go today with the reason we care about executive skills and the reason that we care about how to address some of the current barriers is it leads us towards planning out that first 20 days, which could be the first 20 days of school, or just the first 20 days that you intend to spend on this, focusing on gradual release of responsibility, using those anchor charts and visuals, and continuing to give feedback on student performance, which feels both academic and social emotional. And all of those support the 3 brain networks that we focus on in the UDL guidelines.